Americans love their medicines, but they don't seem to always like the companies that make them. That's all the opening politicians need to attack drug companies and to try to control their prices, among other things. Democrats did it under Joe Biden, and now President Trump is getting into the act. What does that mean for the future of drug innovation, for future cures, for rare and troubling diseases, and what you pay at the local pharmacy?
From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
That's our subject on the Potomac Watch today. I'm Paul Gigot here at the daily podcast of the Wall Street Journal, and I'm here with Kate Batchelder-Odell and Alicia Finley. All right, you journalists who cover this healthcare industry, I'm going to go down a list here of the things the Trump administration is doing. Now, this is a Republican administration, supposedly it likes business, right? At least that's the accusation, favor business. But let me go through a list of what the administration is doing or wants to do on drug companies, okay? Impose price controls on drugs sold in the U.S. Make sure that those companies sell their drugs at the lowest price they also sell them in the developed world. So that's not the average price, it's the lowest price, okay? 100% tariff threat on imported drugs, and a lot of companies make generics in particular overseas. 100% tariff on those. Reduced and slower approvals of drugs at the Food and Drug Administration, especially for drugs that treat or want an accelerated approval basis for rare diseases, and a de facto ban on advertising by drug companies on television. You know, those ubiquitous Wegovy ads, which we all hate, but nonetheless are telling people that these medicines are available for people. Now, this is a Republican administration. What do Donald Trump and his aides have against pharmaceutical companies, which are among the most competitive in the world, Alicia? Really tell us what's going on here.
Well, I think some of this is part of a broader issue with Republicans, and I pointed to grievance politics, and that they just think that pharmaceutical companies make too much money and that they don't do enough for patients and charge too much. This is completely untethered from the facts or reality. If you actually look at the data, companies only charge or receive, pharmaceutical companies only receive about 50% of the quote unquote list price. That's the advertised price. All the rest goes to these pharmacy benefit managers that use these rebates paid by the drug makers to help reduce premiums. Some of it goes to pharmacies, but it basically gets spread out with various middlemen, and the drug makers actually only capture about half of it. One other important point is that generics make up 90% of drugs in the U.S., and they actually cost far less in the U.S. than they do abroad.
These are generic drugs that when a brand name drug goes off patent,
right,
people can make generic versions of it, and then the price crashes.
Right. And you're seeing that with Humira, which is the AbbVie's Humira, which recently or in the last couple of years went off patent, and you've gotten all kinds of biosimilar coming into the market.
What is Humira treat?
Humira, it's various autoimmune diseases.
Autoimmune disease, okay.
And it was a blockbuster drug. But this is the reason why the market is so competitive in the U.S. is one, because of our laws that encourage generic competition, but also competition more broadly. And this is why you see, for instance, Pfizer's stock price really hasn't appreciated much in the last 3 decades, because maybe you'll make big profits for a year or two like it did from the COVID vaccines, but those profits eventually crash too.
Okay, so apart from those factual observations about the real state of drug pricing, which is valuable stuff, your answer is it's grievance politics on the part of the Republicans. So you said that they think companies are too greedy, make too much money. Hey, that sounds like Democrats to me. So, Kate, I want you to make you, what is your answer to my question about why they are doing this?
I think that is the really is the only answer, is that it makes for good politics. I mean, if out-of-pocket spending on drugs makes up 1% of US healthcare spending, but absorbs 99% of the oxygen in Washington when we talk about healthcare spending, I don't think there is much other to attribute that to. I mean, Trump went through a lot of his rehearsed lines about how it's outrageous that we pay more than other countries. And President Biden made similar remarks when he was trying to put price controls on drugs through the Inflation Reduction Act. So there is this
Right.
bipartisan catechism now against drug companies. But real quick, in addition to Alicia's factual points, I mean, nobody wants to say this, but the United States is also the place where companies launch their drugs first, and they get to market much faster. You're talking about months of delays in Europe while single payer systems argue about what to pay for it. And those months matter if you are a person with a terminal illness running through lines of treatment. So not only is it just regrettable that we spend so much time on this relatively minor part of our health system dysfunction, we also just don't talk at all about the ways in which our system is superior to the alternatives available in the world.
What are the implications, Alicia, if, let's say, the president succeeded in being able to browbeat or coerce drug companies to that they must sell their therapies in the US at the same price they sell in, say, Italy, if it's the lowest in the world?
Well, I think that one of two things will happen. One, they will just stop selling their drugs in these other countries, and you're already starting to see that they're pulling out or not, or they're launching later.
Because they don't want then to, if they
They,
sell it for a $1.50, say, in Italy, they have to sell it here. So if they don't sell it in Italy at all, then that sanction won't apply.
Right, and that also applies to some of the European countries have these indexing where they have to where drugs are indexed to what other countries pay, and so companies just choose not to sell drugs in the lower income countries in
Mhm,
Europe
mhm.
because they don't want to have to then be forced to pay those prices in places like Germany. Another thing that could happen is that as a result, you will see less innovation money going into research and development. And this is important to know. In China, a lot of the money is funded, or a lot of research is actually funded directly by the government. In the U.S., that's not the case. Most of the commercial and applied science is funded by companies, biotech companies, venture capital. You'll probably see many fewer startups, biotech companies coming to the market because they realize that their profits are essentially going to be capped.
This export point is very important, because U.S. export point, because if companies stop selling in exports because of the punishment here and the pricing, China's going to fill the gap. And it's going to fill the gap in part for the reason you mentioned. China is making an enormous play, Kate, for innovation and trying to replace the U.S. as the premier developer of biopharmaceuticals in particular. Big investment. They're making huge strides. I mean, everybody I talk to in the industry who follows this says that within a few years, they're going to be at our speed. And there's already drugs on which they are very close and developing. There's people say, oh, well, they're ripping off American patents. They're ripping off American technology. There is certainly that. But they're also making new innovations in molecules themselves.
Yeah, I mean, I think across the spectrum, that old argument that all they're doing is copying our stuff, whether drugs or our defense technology, I think it's a little outdated. I think they have real indigenous development. There's no reason for us to get into that race to the bottom. I mean, it'd be really unfortunate if they did replace us as the world's medicine basket. I do think this particular week's announcement on TrumpRx, where the Trump branding exercise, where he is going to proffer drugs at great discounts, that does look to be, for now, it could be expanded later. It's a bad idea, but it does for now look to be of relatively minimal import, because most people use their health insurance to first pay for drugs. There also are a lot of discount options already for people who need to pay cash for whatever reason. And so this so far, fortunately for now, it has that television quality to it. And it does at least avoid some of the worst impulses of the administration, including explicit negotiation, I use in quotes, to price control drugs.
Let's talk about the TrumpRx and his deal with Pfizer, and let's listen to the president first, and then Albert Bourla, who is the Pfizer CEO.
Pfizer is agreeing to provide some of their most popular current medications to all consumers at heavily discounted prices of anywhere between 50 and even 100%. And that's off the price. And in some cases, even more than that. These drugs will be available for direct purchase online at a website operated by the federal government. We're also announcing that moving forward, all new medications introduced by Pfizer to the American market will be sold at the reduced most favored nation costs. So we'll be paying essentially what other countries are paying, who have been much lower for many, many years.
By this agreement that we did, we commit to onshore the production of our medicines that are consumed in the US and are made outside the US. And for that, we are ready to unleash our investment portfolio in this country. And the president graciously gave us a 3 years grace period that we will not be subject to the 232 tariffs, as long as, of course, we move the products here. That's one. The second overhang in our industry was this uncertainty. What will happen with the framework of pricing in the country? Because this uncertainty, it was what was holding people from investing in the pharmaceutical industry, which resulted in significant reduction of our multiples. Actually, our multiples are at historical low. Well, now we have clarity about what is the framework for the US pricing.
The clarity point is important. I think that was a big goal here of Bourla in particular. But the you gotta love the president graciously gave us a 3-year pass on tariffs, 3-year pass from putting a gun to our head, because as long as we will do what he wants and bring drugs here. I guess two things. One, the discounted prices, is Kate suggests mostly eyewash because people already pay at reduced rates, Alicia? And I guess two, why do we need a government RX drug sale program?
So we don't on the latter. There are actually, as Kate was pointing out, a number of companies that do direct-to-consumer sales. Mark Cuban has one company, but drug makers actually will sell their drugs at discounted rates to consumers on their own websites.
Right, which is advertised. You can see it. People call, on
Right.
this number, look, check in here, and you'll get see if you can qualify for some discounted price.
And those are an attempt to essentially bypass the insurers, which have to negotiate agreements through these, I mentioned before, the pharmacy benefit managers, to get placement on formulary. So sometimes it'll be the case that a drug you are taking won't actually have preferred placement, so you actually can't get that drug, or it's covered at a lower tier, so you have to have higher copays. But more broadly, usually what people end up paying in terms of their copay or cost sharing is usually a percent or a share of the drug's price that insurers charge for prescription drugs, is usually much lower or is at least as low as these discounts being offered, in part because, again, it's a copay and these drugs are already discounted between the PBMs and the drug makers. So it doesn't seem that Pfizer's actually doing anything new. It's just, in some ways marketing its own drugs and saying, here, look, we're doing all these discounts. They're already doing those discounts, including for Medicaid, by the way, which on average gets a 50% discount on drugs and could get even on some drugs even more.
So Bourla comes out of this looking pretty well. Kate, is that what your conclusion is, in the sense that he's come out first with this first big deal with the administration saying they want more companies to step up, or they'll get hit with these 100% tariffs and other things. So Borla has essentially said, got out there first and bought himself some 3 years of immunity for doing this, and the price he is paying, his company is paying, is not all that great. Is that a fair conclusion here? So why did then President Trump agree to the deal?
I think that is a fair conclusion. I mean, I don't envy some of these CEOs who are having to figure out, not just in the drug industry, but across industries, to what extent they should accommodate Trump. And a 3-year delay, stay of execution on these tariffs is a big deal for Pfizer, and so that is a pretty good thing for them to have won. I mean, I think Trump has for a long time really browbeat the drug price issue and likes to look like he's the tough guy doing something about it. And so I do think that is part of what drove him to this deal. And he's also just, so now really elevating his personal transactional style across so many different arenas. And this is just, another day in the White House with him looking like a deal maker who brings Americans low drug prices. And whether anybody reads the details on that, or not.
Even if they really won't bring lower drug prices. The TrumpRx brand name is, in one sense, kind of comic, Alicia. In another sense, it is an opportunity again for government to carve into private business, to carve out a space for itself, competing against private business. What I worry about is not that it'll be Newsom RX under the Gavin Newsom administration, so much as the fact that they may take this and decide to do competitive marketing, competitive for a variety of products. We're going to get into the business of a whole slew of healthcare things.
Well, it's funny that you mentioned Gavin Newsom because if you recall in California, they actually did launch an initiative or venture to start producing state-branded insulin.
That's right. I'd forgotten that. Yeah. When insulin was the hot price-controlled product.
And that, by the way, still has not come to market yet. Maybe
the Newsom insulin.
The Newsom insulin. Maybe sometime by the time the bull train is finally finished, they'll get that up and running. But I think that's exactly the risk that a left-wing or Democratic administration will use this TrumpRx or government website and try to actually force companies to maybe provide discounts, not just on the website, but in terms of to private insurers, and try to leverage that government power. Right now, the deal, quote unquote deal that Pfizer has negotiated with Trump, it's all voluntary, and as you point, it's mostly eyewash. But they could, a Democratic administration could try to take a sledgehammer to these guys.
That's right. On the 100% tariff point on drugs, I have a kind of simple-minded view of this. Kate, American companies make an enormous amount of their generic drugs out of the U.S. That's in India in particular, some in China. I don't know where else they might make it, but I know those two countries. If you have a 100% tariff on those generic imports, aren't you going to raise prices of drugs in the United States? And isn't that contrary to the administration's purpose?
Yes, they're importing, these active ingredients as well. And, Trump first term, the real goal was to get as many generics to market as fast as possible, because once you get multiple generic alternatives to one brand name drug, you start seeing the prices really ski down that slope and consumers getting lower prices. So yes, it runs contrary to their agenda in so many different facets, the drug pricing scene being just one of them.
So if you're a listener who is saying, hey, you guys are all treating this drug price issue not seriously enough because these are costly. And as you know, a lot of people, for some people, most people who have employer plans and government plans already don't pay anywhere close to these brand name to this list prices. But what's your response to them who would say, you know what, nobody should pay more for healthcare, should pay so much for healthcare that it becomes a big part of their income. And yeah, government should get in.
The U.S. actually doesn't spend all that much on drugs relative to all healthcare than other countries do. We spend more on hospitals. We spend more on all those things than other countries do. So as
Other
a
healthcare services.
services like Europe, Canada, and all that. So we just generally spend more on healthcare. We spend doctors also earn more, by the way, here, and we also get the best doctors. And I think that's important to underline is if you have cancer. And by the way, the most expensive treatments are for cancer. Those are the ones that you can cost six figures, but they can be life-saving.
Especially new immunotherapies.
Immunotherapies, and other countries don't have access to them. So yes, there is a price to living longer and actually beating cancer.
And if there are specific drugs that are out of reach for people, you can find ways, I think, Kate, to help in that regard, as some of these drug companies do with their highly expensive new innovative drugs. Let's talk a little bit about the ban on drug advertising, and because that's also a priority of this administration. Basically, Marty McCary, the FDA, and RFK Jr. have said, we want to make the drug companies put so much detail in their ads that the ads will no longer work. So they'll essentially not be able to offer them.
Right. I mean, it's typically been a progressive preoccupation to get rid of direct advertising to consumers on drugs. And this is another example where it's been kind of imported onto the right now. Again, it's very odd. It's an odd preoccupation because most people are deciding whether to take expensive drugs with their doctor and are not choosing the way you choose other products. And also some of the drugs that are being advertised are for, chronic conditions, are not very expensive, but are important to get people to take and to adhere to them. And so it is just an odd drive-by that, again, will not do anything to alter drug spending. And if I could get on one hobby horse here, I mean, eventually we're going to have to start talking about what is actually driving U.S. healthcare spending so wildly. And we all know that hospital spending is just so much more unrestrained than drug spending is. Now, the Trump administration actually did something on this recently that for some reason they never talk about. And it's an experiment on a program called 340B that hospitals are using to basically pocket a lot of money on drugs. And, it started as a program for low income hospitals. And the hilarious example I use is that the hospital where Kim Kardashian had her baby now participates in this program that's supposed to be for these hospitals. And that's how out of control it's gotten. So I bring that up because if the Trump administration could focus on hospital spending and also focus on some discrete insurance issues to give people more choices and better coverage, I mean, that would be so much more of a public contribution than just taking the left's crusade on drug prices and continuing it.
Yeah, it's a super point. And we editorialized on this. I think you wrote this 340B editorial, which is, but the thing is, Kate just summed it up very succinctly, but it's not as simple as saying low prices, reduced prices, discount prices. And that's what, so it's a complicated point. You have to say 340B and people go, oh man, check out, unless they write it as succinctly and as grippingly as you do.
Oh, well, thank you, Paul. But the other issue is that you have hospitals in every single congressional district. They have exercised a lot of muscle in Congress, much more so than the pharmaceutical industry. And you saw that play out in the debate over Medicaid and provider taxes. And believe it or not, they even the hospitals oppose the work requirements. But they're a very big and potent political lobby on the Hill, which has made it very difficult to do any kinds of health care reform.
Right. Yeah, that's exactly right. They fought very hard to try to get even the de minimis changes to Medicaid spending in the one big, beautiful bill. All right, we're going to leave it at there today. Thanks to my healthcare experts, Kate Odell and Alicia Finley. And thanks to all of you for listening. We're here every day on Potomac Watch, trying to keep track of what the politicians are trying to do to you, your healthcare, and everything else. Thanks for listening.